It is no longer news that European countries do not want migrants, especially from Africa and the Mediterranean states in their countries. In fact, immigration has been one of the central issues that is being tackled by almost every European country. But paying migrants to leave their country is taking curbing immigration to a whole new level, and it's exactly what Sweden has decided to do. The question is, will it work, and what should African countries learn from this? If you observe closely, you would notice that the central focus of the policies of every government, whether new or old in Europe, is centered on dealing with immigration. Recall that earlier this year, in January to be specific, the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, widely known for her stance against illegal migration, unveiled Italy's grand plan for Africa during the Italy-Africa Summit. Interestingly, the basis of this grand plan is to curb immigration. Other European countries, including the UK, have also unveiled policies that will curb migration, such as the Rwanda Asylum plan, which didn't later work out. Now recently, Sweden has unveiled its plan to curb immigration, and unlike some other countries that have employed inhumane and illegal tactics to kick out migrants, Sweden has opted to do something different. By something different, we mean paying migrants $34,000 to leave the country.
Take the money and leave, please. The Swedish government is offering to pay immigrants $34,000 if they go back to their home country.
For decades, Sweden has been regarded as a humanitarian superpower, in the sense that it was one of those countries that was very open to migrants, especially from war-torn countries. However, in the past few years, Sweden has struggled to integrate many of the migrants into its society and has decided, like many other European countries, to kick them out. This is understandable because the Swedish government has a responsibility to protect its people and its resources. Now, unlike some European countries that have resorted to some inhumane tactic in driving out migrants, the right-wing Swedish government announced a few weeks ago that they are willing to pay the sum of $34,000 to immigrants who are willing to leave the country. Yes, you heard that right. Sweden wants to pay $34,000 to immigrants willing to leave the country voluntarily. Speaking to the press regarding the announcement, the Swedish migration minister said that Sweden is currently in the midst of a paradigm shift in its migration policy. He further revealed that the new migration law would be implemented from the year 2026 and added that currently, immigrants willing to leave the country can receive up to 10,000 kroner per adult, 5,000 kroner per child, and 40,000 kroner per family. According to Meister Ludvig Aspling of the Sweden Democrats, this grant has been around since 1984, but he noted that only a few people use it. For instance, only one person used the grant last year. However, as Ludvig Aspling explained, the Swedish government believes that if a lot of immigrants are aware of the grant and the size increases to $34,000, it's very likely that a lot of migrants would take it and leave Sweden voluntarily. Aspling further noted that the grant would appeal to the several 100,000 migrants in Sweden who are jobless or have been unemployed for a long time, as well as those whose incomes are so low that they need state benefits to make ends meet. Now, Sweden's decision to give this huge sum of money per individual migrants willing to leave the country voluntarily sends a glaring message, which is that migrants are undesirable and they are willing to go an extra mile to make them leave. Interestingly, the head of migration inquiry, Joachim Ruist, made his opposition to the government's decision known, saying that increasing the grant would send a message that migrants are undesirable and this would hamper migrants' integration efforts. This means that not everybody is cool with the decision made by the Swedish government. However, this decision should not come as a surprise because the government in power is anti-immigration. In 2022, Sweden's conservative Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson came to power with a minority coalition government powered by the Sweden Democrats, known for their striking stance against immigration. He vowed to get tough on immigration and crime, and that was the beginning of Sweden's strong stance against immigration. Interestingly, as we said at the beginning of this video, it wasn't always so. Since the 1970s, Sweden has offered generous development aid and has taken in a large number of migrants since the 1990s. In fact, in 2015, during the height of the migration crisis, Sweden alone took about 160,000 asylum seekers. This was the highest per capita in the whole of Europe. However, the 2015 migration crisis turned things around as the Social Democrat government at the time announced that the country would no longer continue with its open-door policy. Since then, different measures have been implemented to curb immigration in Sweden, including issuing only temporary permits to migrants, tightening family reunification requirements, and increasing income requirements for work visas. The recent increase in grants for migrants willing to leave the country is the latest measure to be implemented in Sweden to curb migration. Now, if you think that it is only Sweden that is paying migrants to leave the country, think again. Many other European countries, including Canada, Germany, and England, have also adopted this policy. Germany, for instance, is paying immigrants $2,000 to leave the country. France is paying $2,800. Norway is paying $1,400. And Denmark, another Scandinavian country, is paying $15,000 to migrants for them to leave their countries. Sweden is certainly the highest paying so far with $34,000. Now the question is, will this policy work in Sweden? Well, only time will tell. But the fact is that any African migrant in Sweden should be smart enough to take the deal and come back to Africa. This is because the sum of $34,000 converted into any African currency is a huge sum of money. In the Nigerian currency, that is almost 55 million naira, and in Ghana, it's around 535,000 Ghana cedis. With this amount, any African migrant should be able to set him or herself up comfortably at home instead of staying in a place where you are not wanted and will be suffering. If we are being honest, the Swedish government's policy is a good one. We are not going to fault them for saying they don't want migrants because Sweden is a sovereign country and has the right to do what it wants to protect its resources and its people. It's the same message we preach when we talk about the sovereignty of African countries and urging the West to leave African countries to make their decisions. To fault Sweden for its migration policy and make it look bad because they don't want migrants would be very hypocritical of us, and that is the truth. Now the fact is, this latest Swedish policy on migration is the best as opposed to some other policies implemented by other European countries, and the reason is this. You see, most of the time, European governments work with the governments of African or Mediterranean countries when it comes to dealing with migration issues. Europe believes that the reason why people from Africa, the Mediterranean, or the Caribbean move to their continent is because of underdevelopment and insecurity. So just like the Italian Mattei Grand Plan unveiled during the Italy-Africa Summit, Europe's solution to this problem is to pledge huge sums of money to African governments for development infrastructures. In return, African governments would implement strict measures to ensure that their citizens do not migrate to Europe. Most of the time, these pledges are not fulfilled, and even when they are fulfilled, the money is not used for developing infrastructures, but rather it flies into the pockets of corrupt politicians. This is the reason why Europe's immigration policy has not really been effective. The root cause of massive migration from these regions of the world has not been addressed. However, with the Swedish plan, the money is given directly to migrants and not to corrupt government officials. It is now left for the migrants to use the funds to better his or her life. African and Caribbean migrants can consider this grant as a form of reparations for the many years of colonialism and exploitation Europe has caused all over the world. But what should African countries learn from this? First, the message that is being passed is that Europe doesn't want migrants. So instead of fleeing to European countries for greener pastures where you would end up suffering, isn't it best to remain in your country and build it? If every African flees to Europe, who would build the continent? Who would push for the African unity and progress we have been preaching for decades? The fact is that the only people that will build the continent are Africans. Europeans have developed their continent, no doubt with the wealth of Africa. But it's time for Africa to rise above victimization and dependency and start building so that its young people would not see the need to go through dangerous routes just to get to Europe and continue suffering. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.